With the crisis looming for hundreds of thousands of American soybean farmers, a text message to a cabinet secretary appears to show concern within the Trump administration. Now, this photo taken by the Associated Press at the UN last week is amplifying concern. It appears to show a text message to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent from BR, widely considered to be Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins.
American soybean farmers are facing one of the hardest moments in decades. A leaked text message inside the Trump administration confirmed what many in rural America already feared: the crisis is real. For years, China was the largest buyer of U.S. soybeans, purchasing about $12.6 billion worth in 2024. In 2025, those sales have dropped to zero. Not a single cargo has left American ports for China this year. The situation became even more painful after Washington announced a $20 billion aid package for Argentina. Soon after receiving that support, Argentina removed its export tax on soybeans and quickly shipped multiple loads to China. The result was immediate. U.S. farmers lost sales that would normally go to them. Prices fell, incomes dropped, and confidence in the market collapsed. What was intended as a show of strength ended up undermining America's own producers.
President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, our next guest, says that a face-to-face meeting is unlikely to happen before next year.
After August 1, when the Trump administration negotiated all of these trade agreements with partners across Asia, it shows the president is still going to use various tariffs to try to generate leverage, try to reindustrialize the United States, try to drive supply chains back to the United States. So in some ways, the trade negotiations seem to never end.
The hope that diplomacy could repair the damage has faded. Despite 3 phone calls between President Trump and President Xi this year and 4 rounds of meetings between trade representatives, there is no breakthrough. Former U.S. officials and current ambassadors describe the relationship as a stalemate. Both sides repeat the same words about stability and cooling tensions, but neither is willing to compromise on the core issues. At best, the two countries may strike limited arrangements, such as a framework over TikTok or cooperation on drug precursors. These side deals do not touch agriculture. For soybean farmers waiting for markets to reopen, there is no relief in sight. The tariffs that were supposed to give leverage have instead locked both countries into a costly freeze. Every month that passes without an agreement means more pressure on American agriculture. Behind the headlines are real families. In Nebraska, Iowa, and across the Midwest, farmers are watching their balance sheets turn red. The American Soybean Association reports that with China absent, U.S. exports to that market have fallen by almost 40% compared to last year. Stocks are piling up, storage costs are increasing, and the basis at local elevators is widening. The average farm price for soybeans has slipped toward $10 per bushel for the 2025-2026 marketing year, according to projections by the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute. For producers who rely on thin margins, this drop is devastating. Local communities feel it too. Equipment dealers, trucking firms, and banks in rural counties are all tied to the farm economy. What began as a trade strategy in Washington is now a financial crisis in America's heartland. The irony is that while American farmers are struggling, Canada is moving in a different direction. Ottawa has been hit by Trump's tariffs on steel, lumber, and farm goods, but the response has been to accelerate diversification. Canada has expanded trade ties with the European Union, signed agreements with partners in Asia such as Indonesia, and invested in domestic industries like critical minerals and electric vehicle supply chains. This contrast is striking. In the United States, tariffs have backfired by hurting the very communities they were supposed to protect. In Canada, the same pressure has become a push to modernize and seek new markets. Farmers north of the border are not immune to global volatility, but they see opportunity where Americans now see only lost sales. The broader lesson is clear. Tariffs may sound like a shield, but when used without strategy, they can turn into a weapon against your own people. President Trump promised to defend America's farmers, yet the policies of 2025 have left them exposed. Meanwhile, Canada, once cornered by U.S. pressure, is finding ways to stand taller on the world stage.
Channel Prime Minister Mark Carney getting ready to head to Europe today. His Prime Minister will be in the United Kingdom for more trade talks with the British.
Are really important, and I think that in a world like we're living in today, it's good to have friends. It's really important to have friends, and for a country like Canada, our prosperity and our security depends on alliances. That leader-to-leader level contact and relationship is critical to that.
In late September, two very different visits to London told two very different stories. Prime Minister Mark Carney arrived seeking new trade opportunities, investments, and allies at a moment when Canada is under economic pressure. Only days before, President Donald Trump had also stood on British soil.
President Trump just touched down for his second state visit to the United Kingdom, but amidst the fanfare of his pending meetings with the royal family and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the Jeffrey Epstein scandal is still casting quite a shadow all the way across the Atlantic.
He was greeted with royal ceremony at Windsor Castle, but his visit became overshadowed when activists projected images linking him to Jeffrey Epstein onto the castle walls. 4 people were arrested, yet the images made headlines worldwide. The contrast is striking. Trump's trip was heavy on pomp but marred by scandal, while Carney's trip is about building real economic ties.
We're seeing, and you're familiar with the European relationship with Canada as well, the idea that we've got to look elsewhere because the U.S. arguably has gone rogue on us.
Exactly. And no matter what else happens in the future, Carney is spot on when he says it's never going to get back to what it was. And so that's something that the Americans are going to take some time to understand and to deal with.
To understand why Carney's mission matters, we need to step back to Washington's trade agenda. Since early September, the Trump administration has been enforcing its reciprocal tariff program. The framework sets ceilings of 15 to 50% on imports and adds targeted surcharges, including a 100% duty on patented pharmaceuticals starting October 1, a 25% tariff on heavy trucks, and a 30% tariff on upholstered furniture. The White House describes these measures as a show of economic strength and a push to rebalance global trade. But the ripple effects have landed heavily on Canada. Manufacturing jobs are under strain as costs rise and exports decline. Canadian officials have warned that automotive and metal exports are particularly exposed. Ottawa has been forced to look outward, seeking to rewire trade ties that for over a century leaned almost entirely on the United States. This is why London matters. Canada and the UK had paused negotiations on a comprehensive deal in early 2024, but now both sides are revisiting the possibility. Trump's tariffs, meant to project American leverage, have instead accelerated Canada's determination to build elsewhere. Carney's agenda in the UK is ambitious. He is meeting Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as well as leaders from Spain, Denmark, Iceland, and Australia. His team is also engaging London's financial sector, presenting Canada's national projects as magnets for global investment. These projects include large-scale infrastructure and energy corridors that require billions in private capital. By highlighting Canada's stability and resources, Carney is hoping to attract those dollars. Canada's selling points are clear. It is part of NATO, maintains a trade deal with the European Union, and is a member of the Asia-Pacific Partnership. It controls vast supplies of critical minerals, energy, and agriculture. Former diplomats have emphasized that alliances and private sector investment are essential if these advantages are to translate into long-term prosperity. In London, Carney is not simply making polite visits. He is positioning Canada as a partner capable of supplying resources, securing trade corridors, and creating jobs at home. What makes this effort more urgent is the timing. With the U.S. market becoming less predictable under Trump's tariffs, investors are watching closely for alternatives. Carney's meetings in London allow him to present Canada not just as a neighbor to the United States, but as a global hub that can anchor supply chains stretching from Europe to the Pacific. This narrative of resilience gives his pitch added weight in the eyes of foreign partners. The difference between the two leaders' trips could not be clearer. Trump's state visit was wrapped in tradition but haunted by images of his past association with Epstein. Even as he met with the royal family, that shadow followed the story across headlines in both Britain and the United States. Carney's London trip, on the other hand, is less dramatic on the surface but aimed at substantive results. By holding talks with multiple leaders and courting global investors, he is quietly shaping Canada's next chapter in trade and security. The larger lesson is about the unintended consequences of policy. Trump's tariffs were designed to showcase American economic strength. Instead, they have pushed allies like Canada to diversify faster and deepen ties with others. One visit produced headlines about scandal. The other is about building economic bridges. In the end, the tariffs are not isolating Canada. They are motivating it to chart a more independent path. And London is the stage where that change is coming into view.
A stark new warning from the Energy Department. According to new projections, Americans could face up to 800 hours of blackouts per year by 2030. That's more than a month without power, and it's raising some questions about the reliability of our electric grid.
And residents on the Sunshine Coast say they're against sending all the power from a local dam to the U.S. for 30 years.
In British Columbia, a single proposal has turned into a national story. Powell River Energy has asked Canada's energy regulator for a license to export power to the United States for the next 30 years. That would lock in supply until 2055. But what seemed routine quickly drew heavy opposition from residents, local business groups, and the Tla'amin First Nation. For Americans, the timing is striking. Washington is counting on Canadian energy to balance out shortages created by high costs and delays in its own projects. Instead of certainty, the United States is now watching as a long-term deal stumbles at the very first hurdle. The dam in Powell River once powered a paper mill that operated for more than a century. When the mill closed in 2021, the company shifted output south. What looked like an easy export is now tangled in questions about local development and energy sovereignty. This is where a regional dispute intersects directly with the larger politics of Trump's tariff era. Donald Trump's tariff program was meant to reinforce American control over supply chains, yet the result has been the opposite in many sectors, including energy. Duties of 25% to 50% on steel and aluminum raised construction costs for utilities, while added tariffs on copper and other metals slowed investment in new transmission lines and renewable projects. The U.S. Department of Energy reported in its summer 2025 review that grid expansion targets are already falling behind schedule. Those delays have made imports from Canada more valuable. Washington assumed those imports would be secure, but the Powell River case shows the weakness in that assumption. Canada is no longer treating electricity as an unlimited export. Communities and provincial agencies are pressing to keep more power at home. Trump's trade war has therefore created an energy paradox. By pushing up the cost of domestic projects, his tariffs make America more dependent on outside supply. And at the same time, they give Canada every reason to tighten its grip on what it sells abroad. The opposition in Powell River is not symbolic. The Tla'amin First Nation and the Cranberry Business Group are redeveloping the mill site, and their pitch to investors includes reliable access to local power. Residents have organized through Energy Democracy for BC, warning that no one can predict what the region's energy needs will be in 2055. Even the provincial utility, BC Hydro, has filed for access under federal fair market rules. This fight connects to a broader trend. Ottawa has launched major nation-building projects in energy and resources, from liquefied natural gas terminals in the Atlantic to cobalt refining in Ontario. These initiatives share a common goal: to capture more of the value chain inside Canada. The longer Trump pushes tariffs across the border, the stronger the incentive for Canada to build industries that use its own resources rather than shipping them to the United States. Powell River is one community, but its debate mirrors the direction of national policy. For the White House, the implications go beyond one license application. U.S. manufacturers in border states already face higher costs for power-intensive production. If Canada restricts long-term electricity exports, those costs will climb further. Trump's strategy was designed to assert leverage, but it has created the opposite dynamic. Canada is learning to conserve its own energy and resources, while the United States finds itself increasingly short of reliable supply. The Powell River proposal is still under review, with a new deadline for public feedback set for October 4. Yet the larger message is clear. A policy of tariffs and pressure was meant to guarantee American strength. Instead, it has encouraged Canadian communities to resist long-term deals and hold on to what they have. What began as a local dispute now stands as another example of how Trump's approach to trade and energy is backfiring, leaving the United States facing harder choices about its own security.